and we put our suit of armor on and we push our shoulders back and we basically join the dick swinging contest. But I have to point out that if you're doing that as a woman, you're at a fundamental disadvantage because you don't have a dick. You don't have one physically, you don't have one energetically, you are not in a male body. Any power that we are wielding coming from that place is built on a foundation of shifting sand. One of my bugbears with feminism is that it operates from this victim consciousness where we're throwing rocks outwards all the time. We're not looking at the inner work that can actually help us to take up more space as things stand right now. Without any system change needing to happen, there is more space for each of us to take up if we can be brave enough to reckon with the fact of our female bodies. I'm Madeline Eliza. Join me to explore female power, embodied leadership, sensuality and spirituality as we weave together ancient and modern, the scientific and the mythic, the erotic and the divine. Hi everybody, welcome to the show. Today we're going to be talking about feminine leadership, what it is and why does it matter. This is a bit of a buzzword hot topic at the moment, so I just wanted to really spend some time unraveling the different strands of understanding here. There's lots of different definitions of what feminine leadership is, and to unpack kind of how we got to where we are today, what's working well, where are we being held back, and why I believe it's so important that we as women step into more of the fullness of our power as leaders. So I guess with feminine leadership, you can look at it as women in power, and how we can better support and enable them to do the brilliant work that they came here to do and that they're capable of doing. And then also feminine leadership in terms of opening up space for more traditionally female traits to filter into the leadership paradigm that we have, which of course is very patriarchal in its basis. So I've spoken a little bit before about this kind of mid-century man in a suit model of leadership, the Don Draper kind of archetype, where this is a very traditional patriarchal understanding of what it means to be a leader based on masculine traits, often distorted masculine traits, like not the healthy masculine, but the distorted masculine, which doesn't really serve men or women. And this model of leadership is rife in corporations all over the world. It's kind of the incumbent system. And I am here to help you shake it up because I think our world is in a precarious position, and I'll talk more about this towards the end of the episode, but we're on the brink of collapse. And the more strong, just, empowered, embodied leaders that we have, the better chance that we've got of making the world a better place and having a positive impact. So if you've been knocking around the corporate world for a while, you've probably had this experience where you walk into a boardroom and there's a group of men sitting around the table, fully comfortable in their male bodies, taking up space, their legs are apart, their hands are maybe behind their head, leaning back, kind of directing the attention and the energy towards their male center of power, right? This is a really common power pose we see with men. Not coincidentally, you'll notice that they're also freely using their voices and expressing themselves. I've worked in a few very alpha macho environments like this. My first corporate job out of uni was at Groupon in its heyday in Sydney, where I think 50% of the team were business development managers, salespeople, mostly guys in their 20s who spent most of the day pacing around the office on the phone, closing deals, high-fiving each other. There was a gong that would be gonged every time somebody closed a deal. The CEO, who was a male, also would ride around the office on a Segway. Like it was a very Yahoo high five, let's go macho kind of corporate culture. And I've worked in a number of different organizations that are variations on that since, with a very masculine dominant leadership team. And I've certainly had this experience of walking into a boardroom or a meeting room or whatever, where there is so much testosterone coming at you that you have to make a lightning fast decision on how you're going to respond. And I have embodied experience of this, and I've witnessed it in so many other women that I've worked with and supported as leaders coming up through different businesses, we tend to either do one of two things. We either shrink because we can't compete with that level of testosterone and masculine power because we're women. And so we make ourselves small and quiet and demure. We kind of go into good girl mode and submit to this chest beating, dick swinging kind of mode that's operating in the office at that time. This is not a very effective way to wield your power. Obviously, you're just submitting and accepting a subordinate position. And I'm not all about trying to get power for the sake of it, but if you have a burning desire inside to wield your energy in the world in the biggest, brightest way that you can, to have a positive impact, to try and solve some of the biggest, gnarliest problems that we've got facing us, then you need to reckon with your own power and you need to claim it. And walking into a boardroom full of alpha males and basically submitting is not a good way to do that. That's the first thing that we tend to do. The second option, which is what neoliberal feminism really drives as a way of being in the corporate world, is that we walk into the boardroom with our power suit on and we armor up and we kind of mimic the men, because we are in this environment where the power belongs to the men. Power and masculinity go hand in hand. Femininity doesn't really belong there. And so we adopt this posturing of male power. We armor up, we overemphasize our masculine qualities like decisiveness, like aggression, like competitiveness, like this kind of cold, hard approach. And we de-emphasize our feminine qualities like vulnerability and softness and playfulness and creativity. We push that down and we put our suit of armor on and we push our shoulders back and we basically join the dick swinging contest. But I have to point out that if you're doing that as a woman, you're at a fundamental disadvantage because you don't have a dick. You don't have one physically. You don't have one energetically. You are not in a male body. Any power that we are wielding coming from that place is built on a foundation of shifting sand. You are not coming from a place of deep embodiment with your female body. Your female body is kind of an inconvenience in that model. It would be better if it was male, because then you could fully step forth into that arena being one of the boys, because you are a boy too. I'm fascinated with this conversation, as you might be able to tell. And I've lived this path as well. I have spent some years in being in this feminist model of leadership where we're kind of acting like men and we're suppressing our femininity, and it's not empowering. It asks us to override our cycle. It asks us to override our sensuality as women, because we don't have the same expression of sexuality as the alpha male. It's different. It's a different energetic. And I think it's interesting that for a man to wield his sexuality in the workplace, and I'm not talking about sexual harassment, sexual assault, the kind of Me Too bucket of issues, but for a man to walk around the office or ride around the office on a Segway, fully embodied in his masculinity, like owning it, exuding testosterone and masculine energy, is normal. Actually, that's a really good way to climb to the top. The more alpha you can be, the better. If a woman walks around the workplace exuding her sexuality and fully unapologetically embodied in her femininity, it's almost seen as a detriment. It's a way to reduce your power, because it's almost a bit shameful and a bit of a joke, like don't be too sexual at the office. And again, I'm not talking about overtly sexual behavior. I'm talking about being grounded and embodied in your sexuality. We need to put the suit on and pretend to be a man. That's the way that we have learned that you can become a person of influence in your organization. And this is due to centuries of conditioning telling us that female sexuality is sinful and wrong and the cause of the downfall of civilization. It causes big problems for men. You'll notice that the history books and the religions are written by men, and so female sexuality has been demonized. And when you have a female body, it presents a conundrum, because you are in the workplace wanting to get the job done and to perform at your peak, but you have to do it by pretending to be a man. And this is not very empowering. And I think we're starting to see this model of feminist ideology really start to crumble and come apart at the seams as more and more women are treading this path and then finding themselves completely burnt out, completely out of alignment in their nervous system, dysregulated, using unhealthy coping mechanisms, carrying an unfair portion of the burden at home and at work. Like, we're trying to do it all because we've been told that we can do it all, and we just can't. We can't do it all at the same time. So this is kind of, if mode 1 is submission, like being like a little mouse, mode 2 is joining the dick swinging contest and pretending that you're a silverback gorilla. But you're not a silverback gorilla. You're more like a lioness, right? And I'm interested in this third model of feminine leadership and really embodied female power, where we're completely grounded in our sexuality, in our sensuality. We're connected to our womb space. We're connected to our cycle. We've reckoned with our inner shadows and blocks. Like, we've come to terms with the fact that we have a female body and we're comfortable in it. And we're comfortable owning it, and we're comfortable taking up space. One of my bugbears with feminism is that it operates from this victim consciousness where we're throwing rocks outwards all the time. We're not looking at the inner work that can actually help us to take up more space as things stand right now. Without any system change needing to happen, there is more space for each of us to take up if we can be brave enough to reckon with the fact of our female bodies. And our sexuality is an implicit part of that. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Your sexual energy is your life force energy. It is the current that runs through you. This is the energy that has the power to bring new life forth into this world. I don't think it's possible for us to have a conversation about female power without including a conversation around female sexuality, because it has been suppressed for so long. And this is really an inner journey for each of us to go on to reclaim all of the parts of ourselves and all of our fullness as women. And we do this inner work so that we can go out into our organizations or into our communities and do the outer work that really matters, like do the work out in the world that matters. So if mode 1 is the meek little mouse, mode 2 is I'm a silverback like the men, then mode 3 is saying, no, fuck that. Actually, I'm a lioness, and boys, I'm going to need a little bit more space. This is what excites me, and the potential that we've got to transform what feminine leadership means. And there's this whole other conversation going on at the moment, which I call the soft femme movement, which says feminism is a rort, you're in hustle mode, you're burnt out, you're disconnected, you're too in your masculine, you need to get more in your feminine, we need to get more grounded in the body, we need to embrace our softness, da-da-da-da-da. This is all really important work. But if you're in an executive leadership team, leaning 100% into your feminine softness isn't going to serve you either, because we need to work with the system that we've got, and actually having a really beautiful harmonized balance of inner masculine and feminine energetics is what we all need to be aiming for. This is where true power comes from. And I think this is a model of energetics. It's a model of leadership that just fits a bit more comfortably. It's not a restrictive binary, be masculine or be feminine, or adhere to this system or completely throw it out. Like, we can find nuance here. And I think the image of the lioness is a beautiful one to hold on to. I want to talk a little bit about the changes that we're seeing in workplaces at the moment, in workplace culture, because it is really encouraging when we talk about feminine leadership and getting more women into positions of power and influence. So there's been a lot of conversation around organizational culture for the last 20 odd years, and we're seeing more traditionally feminine soft leadership skills come to the fore. Finally, the importance of things like emotional intelligence are being recognized in the workplace, being able to build rapport with your team, being able to nurture and guide and connect people, and all of the soft skills that you need to cultivate in order to be able to do that as a leader. So I think that's a really beautiful advancement that we've seen. But it's still, you can do all of that and still be trying to join the dick swinging contest because you haven't reckoned with your female body. So I don't think that's completely 100% of the puzzle. Something else I think that's really exciting that's happening now is this increasing volume of the conversation around menopause, and even menstrual leave in some workplaces is becoming normalized. And I think this is incredibly encouraging. There's more women standing up and saying, hey, I'm having a different experience than my male colleague, and all of our policies and everything is written according to his brain and his body, and mine is different. There's an incredible neuroscientist called Dr. Lisa Mosconi who's putting out amazing work on the female brain, and particularly the changes that happen in the female brain during menopause. This is called the neuroendocrine system. It's the connection of the brain and the hormonal system, because menopause doesn't just affect your hormones and your body, it's also affecting your brain in different ways. And the more that we are having loud conversations about this and taking up space with our voices and with our bodies, the more we can drive systemic change. And that's really starting to happen now. So I think that's really exciting. Obviously, for some years now, we've had a lot more flexibility around childcare. And I think this is hugely important for women and for men who are parents. I do think feminism has gone slightly, I think that the direction that we've gone with this kind of girl boss feminism of we can do everything that the men can do, and just give me more childcare support so I can put my kids in care and get back to work. That's what we're seeing a rebound against now. And I must say that I really felt this when I became a mother and tried to white knuckle my way through my pregnancy, going at the pace that I had been going at, which was like about 150 kilometers an hour. My body just kept saying no, and this happened in both my pregnancies. I tried to push and push and push, and my body just went, no, 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 no. Like, you can't actually keep going the same way that you were before you were pregnant. And certainly when you become a mother, and then as a first-time mother especially, you return to work and you think that you can just pick up where you left off. And I think many of us have had a rude awakening when we go through that process, and your brain is different, your body is different, your energy is different, your priorities are different. Like, your whole world changes when you become a mother. And I think this feminist kind of push to get women into the workforce, we hear so much about that. But this is why we're seeing so much burnout now, because women have dutifully followed these tenets of neoliberal feminism and put their kids into care and gone back to work and done a 40-hour week and run alongside the men is basically what we're trying to do. So I've had a baby, that's done. Now I'm going to keep running with the blokes. I can keep up because I'm a girl boss and I can do it all. And our bodies, again, just say, well, no, actually you can't. Female burnout is exponentially higher than male burnout. This is something that women are experiencing much more frequently. And I think we can all point to that experientially in our own lives as well. You don't need to look at the research, which is clear. But if you've tried to return to work as a mother, picking up where you left off, it's immediately clear that you cannot continue the same way that you did before. And so we need our workplaces to reshape around our feminine experience. And part of this is cultivating policies and continuing to have these conversations that drive systemic change. But something else that I think we have so much power, again, we have more power than we realize. If we can be brave enough to reckon with our female bodies and to take up space and ask for what we need. I had an example of this I shared recently, where my son started school the same week that we launched a program with the business that I was working with. And it was a really inconvenient time for me to be out of the office. If you've worked in online business and been through launch periods, you know it's all hands on deck and kind of frenetic while you're getting whatever that project is over the line. But it was really important to me to be able to support my son in his first week of school. He's at a beautiful Steiner school where the parents needed to be there for the first 3 days, and they were only half days, and it was about easing the transition for the children and also building connections with the other parents, it felt very beautiful and gentle and like a gentle easing into this big change instead of an abrupt dropping off at the school gate, see you later, kind of an abrupt jump cut into this new phase. And I really wanted to create the space to honour that. And so I'm fortunate enough to have very flexible work arrangements and rearranged my schedule so that I could be there with him. But even though I have, enough clout and autonomy to be able to do that, I still felt really uncomfortable saying to my colleagues, hey, I'm not going to be there at this time on Monday when we're having this meeting about the launch because my son is starting school. It felt edgy for me to ask for that space. And I think a lot of us have probably had experiences like that where it feels uncomfortable to ask for what you need. But the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. So if you're in a corporate role and you have opportunities to lean into that, I really invite you just to see where you can push it a little bit more and prioritize yourself, your body, your children, which you're holding as this motherhood vessel, if you're a mother, to see where you can just ask for a little bit more space. And you might be pleasantly surprised at what's available there to you if you just have the courage to lean into it. I had a conversation with a girlfriend recently who was applying for a new role, and she has 2 school-aged children, and they wanted her to be in the office. This whole conversation around whether you're working remotely or in the office now is it's all cracked open. There's no one size fits all. So there's a lot to be negotiated there now, which I think is also an interesting opportunity for us as women when we're often the primary carer for our children too. This friend is a single parent, and she was being asked with this new role whether she could be in the office, I think 4 or 5 days a week, more than was really comfortable for her. And it was going to involve her putting her children into after school care, which she didn't really want to do, or else them being at home by themselves. And I said to her, why don't you calculate how much it would cost you for the 3 days a week that you're going to need to change your kids' plans? Calculate how much it would cost you to have a nanny at home with your kids from 3 till 5:30 or 3:30 till 5:30 or whatever those hours are, and ask for that on top of the salary package that's being negotiated. Like it might be an extra $10,000, $15,000, I don't know. Like ask for what you need. And that feels really edgy. But if you look at the statistics on the way men negotiate salary versus the way women negotiate salary, if you're up against, to continue that example, if there was a male candidate also going for that position, statistically, he's probably asking for $10,000 to $15,000 more than you anyway, even though I'm sure his skills are probably the same. This is what happens. This is partly why we have a gender pay gap. And I'm not wanting to victim blame here and say that it's all because women don't ask. Of course, there's so many complex factors at play here, and women have been oppressed for decades in the workplace and for centuries before that. Like no one's disputing that. But I do think there is a little bit of space for us to claim where we have agency and we have power. If we can just be bold enough to ask for what we need. You've probably heard this statistic. It was kicking around, 10, 15 years ago, maybe, based on Hewlett-Packard research that said a woman will apply for a job when she is confident that she meets 100% of the criteria, whereas a man will apply when he is confident that he meets 60% of the criteria. And that research has had some conjecture since, with people quibbling over the percentages. But it's still clear that women are much more discerning in applying for jobs. Men are likely to apply for more jobs. And so statistically, that does open up more opportunities. I think the same is true on dating apps, actually, from everything that I've read, where something like 20% of the men get access to 80% of the women, because women are usually much more discerning about who they'll match with, whereas men are more likely to. I won't speak in broad generalizations, but the statistics show that men are more likely to match with a wider variety of women, whereas women will focus in on like the top alpha percentile of the male candidates there. So there's interesting parallels with dating apps and the recruitment process. But anyway, I digress. I wanted to share a personal example of an experience that I had in the workplace as a new mother, of like what's possible, what can be possible when we ask for it. And for me, it wasn't even so much asking for it, it was having an employer who was dialed in enough to the female experience that this was made possible for me. So I started in a new role as COO of a tech startup called Candid when my son was 6 months old, and he's my first baby. And I started part-time, and then I scaled up to full-time, and my son's father became the primary carer for him while I went back to work full-time in that year between him turning 1 and 2. It's a whole other conversation about flipping gender roles, which I'll save for another day. But I just wanted to share those initial months where I went back to work. My employer said, look, you've got a baby. If he's in a daycare center down the road while you're here, your mind and your body are going to be with him. Like, we're breastfeeding. We've carried this child for 9 months. To think that we can just sever this mother-baby dyad to get women back into the workforce is kind of ridiculous. And I'm not saying my situation was perfect. It's just one example of how things can be different. And what we did was find this office, which was actually a house by the beach in beautiful Byron Bay where I live. I was very fortunate. And my employer converted this small outbuilding in the yard of the house into a creche and decorated it beautifully. There was a cot and a feeding chair and a little kitchenette and toys and books and a soft fluffy rug and for my son to play on. And I had a budget in my salary for a nanny. And so for those first few months when I returned to work in a new role, which is quite challenging when you're still breastfeeding and you're a new mother and you've got the baby brain and, it's quite a lot of pressure. And I was in a senior role, but I had this incredible setup where my son was right there. I could go and breastfeed him as many times as I needed to during the day. I could spend my lunch break playing with him and just pop in and see him as I needed to. And it wasn't that hard to set up. I mean, we had this wonderful property which made it easier, but in principle, like it's not that complex. It's not that out there. It just is a different way of framing things when we center the woman, and we center mothers especially, because I think mothers are often the ones who are carrying so much, and often in our culture we're not centered. And if we can support mothers, then we support their families, we support the entire community and every organization that they touch. So I just wanted to share that as a beautiful example of how things can be when we really center the female body and the female lived experience. When we stop viewing our female bodies as a messy inconvenience, which really is how we've been encouraged to see them since forever, they're a messy aberration from the norm, which is masculine, right? Like it's not convenient. If you're in a corporate leadership role, it's really not convenient to have a female body. When we shift our mindset and do a big paradigm jump from thinking about our bodies in this way, and we start to instead hold deep reverence for our bodies as sacred vessels of creation and vessels of life and portals to the divine, then our whole transformation with self and with our own power completely transforms. And this is why I'm so passionate about sharing some of the teachings of Tantra for female leaders, because it's not all about sex. It's a whole new way. Well, it's not new. It's new if you've been stuck in this feminist mindset. It's an ancient way, actually, of viewing the connection between the body and the divine. And it just gives us so much more breathing space as women. Tantra is a beautiful framework that really honors the feminine and honors the power and the fullness of the feminine. And so I think it's a very rich field of exploration for anyone who's in a leadership role, looking to more deeply honor their femininity and also to cultivate this balance of masculine and feminine within the self. I've talked about this quite a lot. We can get caught up in talking about alternatives to patriarchy in a way that really denigrates men, right? I think I often use the Barbie movie as a reference point here because I think it was a good example of how feminism can be really dismissive of the masculine and kind of flip the balance in quite a wounded way, where for us to have power, we need to put men down into a subservient role. And I don't think that's the path at all. There's this beautiful parable from David Foster Wallace. I think he gave it at a graduating university address once. He's a fabulous writer. And he says in this parable, there are two young fish swimming along, and an older fish swims past in the other direction. And the older fish says to the younger fish, "How's the water, boys?" And the two young fish keep swimming for a bit, and then one of them turns to the other looking confused and says, "What's water?" And it's a beautiful story about how sometimes we are so immersed and enmeshed in a system of thinking and being and operating that we're not even aware of it. And sometimes the first task that we need to do is to make the implicit explicit and bring it up to the light so that we can examine it and decide, is this actually serving me, or could I maybe discard this in favor of something that fits more comfortably? And I think this is a powerful parable for the type of inner work that we need to do as well. Sometimes we're not even aware of our limiting patterns until we really take the time and create the space to examine them. So this can operate on an individual level, on an organizational level. If you're interested in diving deeper into this, I have a free training on my website called The De-Armored Leader, which really goes into this topic in more detail of how we can de-armor ourselves and de-armor our teams so that we can build more truth and more trust and work together in a way that is much more robust and achieves much greater outcomes. So if you're interested in that, we look at polarity, we look at embodiment, and we also look at vulnerability as 3 pillars of de-armored leadership. There's a whole bunch of training videos and worksheets and info sheets for you to have a look at there. So if you're interested, you can go to my website, madelineeliza.com/leader, and you can get access to all of that there. To continue onwards, making the implicit explicit. I think one of the things that's implicit for all of us, if you've grown up in the West, in a kind of Judeo-Christian society, which is certainly my experience, we have grown up with these Christian stories of femininity. And in the Christian stories, the power belongs to the men. You have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And in some traditions, in Catholicism, certainly Mother Mary is really venerated as a saint and a powerful divine figure. But in other Christian traditions, like the Protestant tradition, they don't worship Mother Mary at all. So in this context, if you're a woman, there's no pathway to power. The power belongs to the men. And even in the case of the Virgin Mary, it's a very tightly restricted view of what femininity is. Sure, she might have power and influence, but the only way she is able to operate there is this very pious, soft, demure, kind of good girl archetype, right? This purity and devotion. And that's a beautiful archetype to play with for the feminine. We don't need to be like bad bitches all the time. I think being in this space of devotion and love is really important and powerful, but it's not all that we are. And studying Tantra, I've found it so refreshing. There is a group of 10 goddesses, the Mahavidya, which comes from ancient Hindu tantric traditions. And these goddesses represent the full spectrum of femininity. There are pictures of them with skulls around their necks and holding severed heads. This is the goddess Kali, which you may have heard of, is one of these 10 goddesses. There are goddesses representing like the crone phase of life and elderhood, where beauty and youth and purity are not the qualities that are valued in the feminine. It's strength and ferocity and truth and protection and these other qualities. And it just cracks open the whole idea of what it means to be a woman. And I offer that as an alternative to these Christian ideals of femininity, which are so restricted and so narrow. One of the problems that happens when we're in this girl boss, and I'm using these terms interchangeably, girl boss, do it all, neoliberal feminist, this is the feminist ideal that has us doing everything that men can do, that has us super individualistic, that has us leaning in and juggling all the balls and climbing our way to the top, but from a kind of a masculine operating system. Talking about feminine leadership, one of the greatest, most beautiful feminine archetypes is the oracle. She, if you look at this polarity perspective, the masculine is leading in the outer world and the feminine is leading in the inner world. She pulls him into his heart. She is the source of wisdom and intuition, and the masculine is like the outer doer and the protector. I have really tapped into this in my own leadership experience. I've worked with female founders and with male founders in this kind of partnership role, and all experiences have been beautiful. I've been so fortunate in my career to work with such incredible people, and I've loved working with women for the sort of sisterhood that can arise there. But I think what I discovered working with men was the power of this kind of oracle mode of being, where these skills of intuition and empathy and deep listening and really offering that unwavering support for that vision. These are more feminine skills which allow us to tap into that kind of oracle space. And you don't learn these skills at business school. This is one of the beautiful things about feminine leadership, is that we can cultivate these capacities within ourselves, and we can use them in our organizations, we can use them in our communities, we can use them with our families. But the feminine is about being rather than doing, and our culture prioritizes the doing. So just an invitation where you can to lean back into that space of beingness and not to undervalue what you bring to the table just by how you be as a mature, evolved, emotionally intelligent woman of capacity. There's so much value there. So, why does any of this matter? I feel very passionate about reinvigorating these kind of goddess leadership traditions and finding more balance between the masculine and feminine within our organizations and within ourselves, and fashioning an alternative to girl boss feminism, to being a soft femme, like finding something that fits for women who want to lead and who are working in organizations with men where we're still seeing like patriarchal paradigms play out. How do we navigate all of this nuance and do our best work and show up as our best and brightest selves every day? I think this is really important to do this inner work so that we can come to a space of beingness where we're at our most impactful. I think it's really important because our civilization is really on the brink of collapse. Depending on who you talk to, we already are collapsing. Ecologically, we're reaching these tipping points, which are points of no return. So it's not like, if we work really hard now, we'll be able to stop this collapse from happening. There's some amazing thinking happening now around what collapse means and how do we best navigate that. It's like, how do we deal with it now? How do we face the biggest problems that we're going to have to grapple with over the decades ahead? This is a track that's running in the back of my mind most of the time, especially as a parent of young children. What sort of a world are my children going to inhabit? I think a lot of us ask these questions, and if we're operating on shifting sand because we're trying to pretend to be one of the boys, if we're pulling back from wielding masculine power and we're in this soft femme space where we don't really want to go in the boardroom and like front up to where the powerful negotiations are happening, we're not able to offer our fullest contribution to the world. And I really think this planet needs as many of us as possible offering our fullest, biggest contributions. So this is my take on female empowerment and feminine leadership. And I think it's really important. I think it's a really important conversation to be having. As I said, if you're interested in learning more about this, you can jump over to my website. There's a free 3-part training series, which is my take on the type of leadership that we need, how to cultivate that in ourselves, and how to then bring it forth into our teams, because there's 2 parts to this puzzle. We're not just operating in isolation. If you want to dive into that, it's at madelineeliza.com/leader. Again, if you have enjoyed this episode, I would love if you could rate and review the show so we can get it out there to as many people as possible. I'd love you to share it with your friends. Hit me up in the comments below with any feedback or thoughts on the topics we've talked about today. Really love to stay connected with you. And until then, I will see you next time.